Which came first, the chicken war or the egg war? Welcome to American Esoterica. If history class gives you the white, this is the yolk, the essential stuff in between, the personalities, events, and other ephemera that shape our history and culture. I'm Brian Powers. There are plenty of silly skirmishes in our history, and just because they're deadly doesn't make them any less ridiculous. From Michigan and Ohio almost throwing down over Toledo, to an international incident started over a pig, the one thing that we as humans seem truly good at is getting into scrapes over dumb things. In San Francisco, in the years just prior to the Civil War, there was a long Cold War and briefly a hot war that left a whole lot of folks scrambling for eggs. Like pretty much any war ever, this one came about because of a scarcity of resources. The gold rush of 1849 brought a swarm of prospectors to the Bay Area. What it did not bring with it, however, was an accompanying swarm of, say, farmers. This turned out to be a real problem, because while dry goods and prospecting equipment could make the journey out west relatively unscathed, food could not. The sudden onrush of fortune seekers overwhelmed local resources, which were unable to ramp up local food and farming infrastructure fast enough. What these hard-working individuals needed was protein. And lots of it. Eggs were the great way to get fast protein, but the clucking supply couldn't match the clucking demand, and scarcity began to drive up prices. Soon, a single chicken egg cost $1, the equivalent of $30 today. A dozen eggs for $12 in 1849 money? Heck, I swore off omelets when egg prices hit a third of that in today's money. Stores became desperate for suppliers, placing ads in local newspapers desperately seeking eggs and butter. This crisis wasn't going to be over easy. In 1849, an enterprising pharmacist by the name of Doc Robinson thought up his own gold rush. 26 miles to the west of San Francisco lay a small series of rocky islands known as the Farallones. They were harsh, desolate, and rocky islands, little more than giant crags of granite thrust up out of the sea, surrounded by Hitchcockianly aggressive seagulls, great white sharks, and an unreasonably large supply of shipwrecks. Also, there were great swarms of kelp flies, which prefer to live inside a seal's anus when not tormenting humans. Seal anus flies. What the Farallone Islands had in abundance, though, were seabirds. Seabirds laying eggs on their rocky breeding grounds, and the largest seabird nesting colony in the United States. The most prevalent bird on the Farallones was the common murre. While other birds nested on the island, murre eggs were prized above all. It certainly wasn't their cooked texture, which still managed to be translucent no matter how much you cooked them, with bright red yolks. It wasn't their flavor, which was passable when fresh, but nightmarish and fishy tasting when past their peak. No, what made murre eggs so desired was their size, which was over twice that of a regular chicken egg. It was with this in mind that Doc Robinson convinced his brother Orrin to join him on an expedition that could make them rich. The two took a boat and set off for the Farallones with dollar signs in their eyes. It didn't go smoothly for the brothers. The journey itself was rough, and gathering the eggs took a lot more work than anticipated. On the way back, the water was so rough that they managed to lose fully half their haul, and when they finally reached the shore, they swore off ever going back. Of course, their disastrous trip proved not to be so disastrous after all. They wound up selling the remaining half of their haul for a cool $3,000, which is something like $840 million today. Okay, it's around $100 grand today, which is still a lot of money for a couple days in a boat collecting eggs on a set of death trap islands. Word travels fast, and pretty soon the next rush wasn't for gold, but for eggs. Eggers, as they were known, soon began to mine the Farallones for eggs constantly. Since the older the eggs were, the worse they taste, eggers would begin each nesting season by smashing every egg on the island, ensuring a fresh supply. Kind of like how I make Wendy's throw out all their French fries and make me brand new ones every single time I get a Frosty. It was nasty work. The islands were hard to climb at the best of times, but these were covered in a deep layer of bird poop. The workers adapted, building crampons for their shoes out of old nails and rope. Crampons are like climbing cleats with spikes sticking out that you attach to your shoes. I had to look it up. Still, accidents, injuries, and more were prevalent, with at least one egger falling to a messy death on the jagged rocks below. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. It took almost no time before egging took on the same general tone as liquor bootlegging during Prohibition would. Eggers formed up into gangs to assert their interests, and the violence spilled into the streets as the gangs fought like, well, gangs. In 1851, 6 hard-boiled men sailed to the main island in the Farallones and declared that they, as the organizers of the Pacific Egg Company, had the exclusive right to it because they said so. You hear? They claimed right of possession, which just meant that they felt entitled to the land because they were standing on it. They hired security guards to protect their claim, while rival gangs had to make do with the eggs on the other much smaller islands, which were pretty much just boulders. Not that the other gangs didn't try. Frequent visitors would show up armed to the teeth to do battle with the egg company or just poach the eggs. One boatload of them even hid out inside a cave underneath the island biding their time, until ammonia from all the bird poop that had been raining down on them built up and killed several of their crew. Piracy was rampant as well. Boats of eggs bound for the shore were routinely hijacked by other boats armed with cannons. The federal government even tried to intervene once, only to realize that they were greatly outgunned and outmanned before retreating. The San Francisco streets saw many a stabbing or shooting occurring between rival egg games. You know. 1855 saw the United States seize the islands for itself, building a lighthouse there. It officially refused to recognize the Pacific Egg Company's claims, but it did allow it to keep conducting business on the island so long as it shelled out for the lighthouse keeper to keep his own beak wet. He even became a stockholder in the company. This arrangement worked out well for everyone until the first lighthouse keeper's successor in 1859 got a little too greedy. The new keeper had taken the job precisely for the corruption, and he actually leased the island egg gathering rights to the highest bidders, controlling the egg trade. He was removed in disgrace for his corruption in 1860, but the sudden power vacuum escalated an already out-of-control situation. First, the Pacific Egg Company decided to reassert its claim to the island, tearing up the government's roads and putting up signs banning the lightkeepers from specific areas. They then literally kidnapped 4 lightkeepers and tried to physically remove them from the island. The head keeper noted that the egg company and lightkeepers are at war. A pragmatic member of the government realized that the issue had to do more with the struggle over the egging rights, so he decreed that the Pacific Egg Company had the full rights to egging in the Farallone Islands. That would settle the war with the lighthouse keepers. What it did do was ignite a war with the most powerful competing egg gang, a group of Italian fishermen led by a man named David Batchelder. He and his compatriots made several attempts to invade and take the islands for themselves. Once, they even built a house and a stone fort on an island. Each time, the United States Revenue Cutter Service would arrest them all and take their weapons. Batchelder continued to attack the islands undeterred. The official egg war finally came to a head on June 4th, 1863, a month before an even larger battle broke out in a place called Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The night before, Batchelder and his men sailed out to the Farallones, where they were warned by the armed security forces of the egg company to land at their own peril. Batchelors shouted back that they'd invade if they darn well felt like it, in spite of hell. The Italians then spent the rest of the night drinking on their boats and yelling taunts at the men on shore. At dawn, for some reason, Batchelor and his army of hungover Italians had the bright idea to invade D-Day style, complete with their own cannon. The Pacific Egg Company responded with cannon fire and bullets as well. One Egg Company employee fell in the battle, while 5 Italians were wounded, one of them later succumbing. The Italians, realizing just how soft-boiled their plan was, finally cracked, knowing they were beaten, and retreated. Batchelor stood trial for manslaughter and served 9 months in San Quentin, and the Egg War died out with his prison sentence. The Pacific Egg Company was now fully free to continue its war on the common murre, whose population was decimated and still hasn't fully recovered today. As chicken egg production finally ramped up, the price of eggs came back down, and the Pacific Egg Company looked for new ways to make a buck on the back of wildlife, slaughtering the seals and sea lions on the island and rendering them into oil. The increasingly greedy Egg Company poked at the federal government every chance it got, from demanding the removal of a foghorn because it scared the birds away, to banning the lightkeepers from harvesting eggs for their own meals. On top of that, their oil-rendering operations were creating thick clouds of black smoke that obscured the beams of the lighthouse. In 1881, the government had had enough. An executive order banned commercial egg collection on the Farallones, and a force of 21 soldiers arrived on the main island to forcibly evict the Egg Company. After 30 years of plundering eggs, the Pacific Egg Company wound up like much of its harvest, fried. At least that's a little sunny side up on this story. This has been American Esoterica. All sounds were made by me, Brian Powers. Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? Just want to talk about eggs, baby? Drop me a note. The address is yell@americanesoterica.com. More information on the show can be found at americanesoterica.com. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.